#idataengineer.
My name is Daniel. Some call me the Data Janitor, and I'm building Pipeline Data Engineering Academy, the world's first data engineering bootcamp. Not one of today's data engineers grew up as a kid imagining becoming one. I definitely didn't. That made me think about how others look at our line of work, and I feel the best way to explain it is through asking a handful of practitioners about their journey and how their work look like.
Who are you and what do you do now?
Yeah, hey, I'm Martin. Thanks for having me. When people ask me what I'm working at, especially my grandparents and so on, I always say I do EDV, which is in German elektronische Datenverarbeitung, which stands for processing of data. Sometimes I also say I'm the janitor of the company. Sometimes I also say I'm a computer scientist. And I think this also is how I got into data. I studied computer science for a really long time. In the 90s in Berlin, when you were doing your computer science degree, it was no problem of doing that for 7 years. So was one of these long-term students. I got really interested in robotics. I was here at Hamburg University in the AI lab, and there we programmed robots. So these kind of Sony Aibo dog robots to play soccer. That already got me interested in AI, but also in software architecture and in building reliable, robust systems, right? So with these soccer robots, you had to program them, and then you could compile the program at that time in C++. You put it on a memory stick, put that stick in the butt of the robot, switched it on, and then it had to play soccer. And it had to boot, and any mistake you made in your programming would clearly kind of result in not winning a soccer match. It was really nice. So to build a really robust architectures so that these robots would not crash and play soccer. We eventually also became a world champion with that. It was really nice. Then I spent another 7 years in academia doing a PhD in labs where they were focused about language and how language works. So there I was building systems that would process language or would, in Common Lisp, actually, that was really, really nice. So there I actually learned real computer science. So it took me 1 year to understand Common Lisp. And since then, that really helps in learning programming languages. During that time, I also discovered that I not really will become a professor because it's not kind of my personality to write research proposals and churn out a lot of papers. So I decided to stop that and go to the industry. For me, it also was always very clear I wanted to go back to Berlin, a city that is very dear to me. And 15 years ago, there was not really IT jobs in Berlin. You could go to Deutsche Bahn or to these kind of companies, but then this kind of Oliver Samwer copycat rocket thing started. And that was really good for me because it was at the right time when I was searching for jobs. So the only time I ever applied somewhere was at that time. I was sent out lots of applications, I think 50. And then among 15 offers, I picked the worst one, which was from Rocket. And there I was part of that kind of e-commerce blitzkrieg. So building Zalando's worldwide thing, which I really liked. And so there also I was always doing kind of the difficult stuff. So which I wouldn't call it data engineering at that point, kind of software architecture for building e-commerce platforms. It was basically the stuff that later became Spryker. There I did already stuff like search, so how to make sure that the right products show up on top of a page if you search for something, or things like moving dumps around. Then eventually Project A happened. So Project A is another VC that was initially founded by some people from the management of Rocket. And they basically took me with them to Project A. And that's where I am for 9 years already now. And how I got into data engineering was simple. They needed some person to do BI stuff. So I said, okay. I had a colleague, Tamer. He is the chief product officer of Project A. And he once studied in university data warehousing, so what the star schema is and so on. And he told me that in 30 minutes. And I said, okay, that's easy. We just have to get the data into a denormalized form. So let's do it. This is how I kind of got into that role. After a few years, I was for a while the head of BI infrastructure, I think, at Project A, which is not a very sexy title that later turned into the term Chief Data Officer. Currently, I'm leading the data engineering and data science team at Project A.
It's quite a journey, I would say, and it helps even these days knowing Common Lisp and doing robotics.
When I see CVs where people list experience in ROS, which is this robot operating system, that always makes me curious. So people who build robots usually have good software engineering skills because they need to.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What projects, tools, or trends do excite you these days?
The whole industry of data warehousing is moving into the right direction, which I find really exciting, right? So 10 years ago, if you would do a data warehouse project, you would buy one of these big, heavy data warehouse suites from SAP or whoever. And then you would use these click tools or the Microsoft integration services to create these pipelines by clicking. At Project A, we never done that. So we always got around that. And the first thing that is happening really nice is this kind of data pipelines as code, right? So that you don't click, but you write text. When the text can be SQL files, can be Python files, can be shell scripts, and you put them on Git. And then you test them on your machine, and then you test them on a staging server, and then on production. So that is happening, and it's happening with full force, right? So nobody uses Talent anymore or Microsoft integration services. That's really nice. And what also excites me that we survived or dodged the Hadoop area. 5 years ago, all the Project A partners would always come to me and say, Martin, are we big data ready? And shouldn't we also have a Hadoop cluster somewhere? And I'm really proud that I managed to stand up against all these requests. And so I'm proud that there is nowhere in the Project A portfolio a Hadoop cluster running, which I think is really good. There are some Spark clusters, though. That's also we somehow dodged. The trend I think that I see is that people converge onto simple things, which is SQL in databases. Right? And of course, that got a lot easier now with databases like BigQuery or Snowflake. And also on the actual writing pipeline side, so the de facto standard is now dbt, which is, I really don't like it, but it's still much, much better than everything else we had before.
Thank you. Very on point. I like it. How do you see the role of data engineering changing in the coming years? I mean, based on what you just mentioned.
I also see that at Project A in my team. So projects that took us maybe a year or half a year with 2 or 3 people a few years back, now we can get the same results with 20 or 30% of the resources. The productivity has increased a lot, which also means that my team, for example, is not as big as it was 5 years ago, right? So because it's simply not needed. Things like moving data from A to B, right? Getting data out of source databases into some sort of data warehouse. These things have become easy, or connecting to reporting tools. So a lot of painful stuff where in the past you had to write lots of custom code. There are now either really good open source libraries, or you can just buy it, right? So for example, 5 years ago, we would spend enormous amounts of time connecting to the Facebook API or to the Google Ads API and downloading performance data. Nowadays, we just buy that from Stitch, for example. The role of data engineers is, I think, then less in this basic tooling side. People, again, see the need for a properly modeled data warehouse. So the actual Kimball stuff. So to having star schemas, having denormalized dimensions, to have consistency, to make sure that business logic is not duplicated, metrics are properly modeled. And this is something that is trivial to do, but this is something where I see the biggest contributions of data engineers in the next years in properly modeling of data warehouses. The other thing is, and this we also had to learn the hard way of Project A, for me, a data warehouse, or whatever you call your data infrastructure, I see it not only as a tool for reporting, but I see it as something where we drive other business processes in the companies, where you not only put a reporting tool in front of your data, but where you also use the data to automate CRM or to add bidding or to optimize your customer service, where you use your enriched and checked data sets to drive other processes in the company. That's really hard. Because then you all of a sudden have to talk to a lot of people. So you have to talk to IT to get the data to where it's then actually needed. You have to get DevOps people to work together. You have to align with all the business stakeholders. But these are then the projects where actually you get the most value out of your data initiatives. The data engineer who only kind of sits in the basement and processes tickets, creating data pipelines, that part is becoming easier and will become even more so. To activate data, to make sure it improves the revenue of the business or decreases costs somewhere or improves customer happiness, this will be the main fields of operation for data engineers in the next years.
Thank you. What piece of advice would you give to the newcomers who are just starting out their journey in data engineering?
First of all, if you're really a newcomer, I think it totally makes sense if you have the time to visit the March batch of the Pipeline Data Engineering Academy. I know the curriculum, and it's all the things you need to become a successful data engineer. Yeah, and second, so if you are a bit more experienced already in data engineering, then I highly encourage you to join the Project A data engineering team. Right, so we are looking for another medium to senior data engineer from as soon as possible on. Yeah, and you get to work in my team. In general, I would say getting into data engineering is not something I would do immediately. Right, so all the people I hired over the past years, which I think have been almost 100 for in the overall Project A portfolio, I usually look for good software engineers. So people who know to program, people who know software architecture, people who can use Git and the command line efficiently, and people who have ever used a database. So if you want to start a career in data engineering or data science, maybe don't start with the Kaggle competitions or with learning how to use machine learning models, but learn how to get software in production. And I think the easiest to learn that, and this is also how I learned it at Rocket, is to join a company where you learn to work on some web app or something else. Right? So there you will learn how to deploy things, how to test things, how to structure code that complexity doesn't kill you. And so only if you have that, then I think it's easy to learn the additional stuff about databases and performance and so on top. Right, so to summarize, join the Pipeline Data Engineering Academy, join Project A, and learn software engineering.
Thank you. I'm super grateful to hear all this advice. Do you listen to music while you are in the flow?
Yes, all the time. And my colleagues really make fun of me. I grew up in Berlin in the 90s, so it was drum and bass. Although I have quite some records as well, I don't listen to drum and bass at home, but when I'm working, I listen to drum and bass internet radio called Bass Drive. This is something that really, really keeps me focused. Sometimes it's also SoundCloud, techno and house mixes on SoundCloud. I can sit in really busy areas and focus with my headphones on.
Did you have a especially enjoyable meal just recently? Either you cooked it or just picked up on the corner store, like something that made you feel happy in these lockdown days?
I think it's Rosenkohl. I think it's Brussels sprouts in English. It's this greeny stuff. I discussed with friends. I think the quality of Rosenkohl got a lot better in the last years. Right? So where they introduced new varieties that are kind of really spicy or have this crispy taste to it. Much, much better than we used to have in our school cafeteria, which was awful. I'm really happy that I got my kids to like Rosenkohl.
Oh, yeah, that's a hard thing. I tried.
I'm also not cooking them, just putting them in oil with garlic and chili and then put a bit of broth on top of them. And it's so great. Especially this time of the year, it's Rosenkohl. We have it at least once a week currently.
Thank you.
If you are a data engineer and you feel like sharing your story, reach out. I'd be happy to chat with you.
#IDataEngineer